So I'd probably say that this video is a long time coming. There are a few reasons for that, and you'll have to excuse me, but I'm going to do this somewhat off the cuff. That kind of goes hand in hand with the reasons why it's taken me so long to make this video. First off, recognizing one's perfectionist tendencies and nothing ever being good enough so that you never actually produce anything. That's something I've realized I do on a fairly frequent basis, so I'm trying to get away from that. I'm also going to grad school in the fall, so I'm going to have to get away from that. But also more practical reasons concerning privacy. I'm very close with my parents, but I do live with them and don't feel like filming myself in the living room when people are here. They are not here right now. Pretty obvious, but whatever. So I guess the purpose behind this channel is to provide some information for people within the SCI community who have questions. I'm a fairly open person because I've learned to a certain degree to not care what others deem taboo and so on and so forth. And so, I guess the main reason why I'm doing this is because 4 years ago when I got injured, there were a lot of questions that I had, and no matter how many Google searches I did, oftentimes I couldn't find any good explanation, and in a lot of cases, really no content addressing the question directly that I was asking. So I feel in a way that there may be room, there may be a place for this type of forum where people can email me and ask certain questions, especially people who are newly injured and their families, as well as people who maybe have been injured for years and are seeking advice and different lifestyle things that have been impacted by their spinal cord injury. So, as I said, this video is going to be fairly informal. It's the first in the series, so expect low quality. I have invested a little bit into the audio, but, I'm no tech tycoon, and I'm definitely not a techie, so it's a work in progress. Then again, you do have to start off somewhere, right? My SCI story starts about 4 years ago. I was at a friend's birthday party. I had been teaching English abroad for 2 years and in Austria, living in a small town in the vicinity of Vienna. It's about 25 minutes away with the fast train called St. Pölten. One of my former students and a guy who had joined this little makeshift basketball league that I had created between former and current students of the school where I was teaching had a birthday and had invited me out. And I like the guy. He's a cool guy. I still like the guy. And I wanted to rein it in and, show him that I gave a crap about the fact that he was turning 18. And so I went. Needless to say, this is Europe, and people do tend to, especially in their youth, they tend to over-imbibe on special occasions, much like American college students. And this get-together was no different. We definitely probably had too much to drink. And lo and behold, I was not as stable as I normally would have been in a sober state. So, Austria being kind of the holdout amongst European countries in terms of smoking bans. They have instituted one in the meantime, but in 2018, as of then, there still wasn't an indoor smoking ban. So that being said, the building that we were in had no problem with smoking cigarettes. However, if you wanted to smoke other things, you would either have to go outside or on the roof. And so this kid suggests that we climb up onto the roof, access this spiral staircase that would get you to the top, and then smoke a joint up there or something. First guy goes over up on the wall. I follow him. I recognize immediately that I'm not very stable. That's partially the alcohol, but also situational awareness would have definitely helped here, given that it was pretty much the depths of winter. It was January 5th, 2018, and everything was caked in a nice thick layer of ice. And so, as it goes, I pretty much goose dived, swan dived, whatever unelegant bird you want to pick, off this roof into essentially what was a pit. My friends are calling my name for probably 5 seconds or so. JH, 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 John Henry, what's up? And finally I respond, and it's just one long... I've sprained my wrist before. I've bruised bones before. I've been stung by a scorpion before. This type of pain doesn't... Those types of pain, rather, don't even compare with what I was feeling. And I noticed, obviously, like fairly quickly, that something was very wrong, because I couldn't feel my legs and I couldn't get up. So they end up coming over the wall. My friend Peter, I thank God he was there, very valiantly, like, and kind of just superhero-like, scales this wall, jumps over, gets up to me, asks if I can get up. I say I can't. They try and move me, which you're not supposed to do, but they didn't know. I didn't know. I'm groaning and kind of screaming in pain as they try to do that. So they quickly put me back down. Some guy up from a third floor apartment tells us to shut the hell up and that it's late at night. Typical grumpy old Austrian man. To which my friend yells back at him that there's been an accident. At this point, I would say the realness of the situation starts to set in. I definitely know that something bad has happened, but I'm not yet thinking that this is something that's going to impact me for the rest of my life. So anyway, they call the fire department, who have to bring ladders so that the EMS can get into this janitorial pit thing that I fell into and kind of use the ladders in order to push the the stretcher over the wall, back over the wall again, and then into the back of the ambulance. So they do that, and Peter comes with me, and I'm trying to have a good humor about it. And the guy, I think he asked if I wanted to have anybody come with me, and I said, yeah, my hipster friend with the floppy hair up front. And so Peter comes along, and it becomes very clear that it's going to be a very long night. And he's stressed out. He's upset by the whole situation. Eventually, in the early morning hours, I think they tell him, like, dude, it's going to be a while. We don't really know anything. He's gone into surgery. When I get to the hospital, I honestly don't remember very much. I remember being put in the MRI machine, the EMS people and techs talking to me and kind of trying to get me through providing some sort of form of emotional support, I guess you would say. And so, yeah, I go into surgery. Don't remember any of that, obviously, as they had me well knocked out. And I wake up the next morning, and I'm in a bed, and there are a bunch of tubes in my back draining what looks to be like blood and a bunch of fluid out. Have a catheter up my dick, multiple IVs in my arm, and more or less a wreck. I'm in extreme pain like I'd never felt before. But yeah, I'm looking all around. There's this weird man who's like calling out for his wife, and he's like, "Where's my woman?" in like Austrian German. This other elderly woman who's next to me is obviously like taking a spill down a staircase because her whole face is purple, and I mean like she straight up looked like a raisin, and not to be funny at all. It was pretty bad. And so kind of viewing this place, the severity of the situation, definitely set itself in. So doctors would come in day after day. One of the main surgeons, I think his name was Dr. Hoffman, really nice guy. And, you know, he would always ask, you know, day to day, as they were doing the morning rounds, how I was doing, if I noticed any changes, if I felt any new sensation, if I was able to make any new movements or was regaining movement. And, you know, you hope to God or the universe or whatever the hell you believe in that's going to happen, that you're going to be one of the lucky ones, that you're going to fall into the 5 or 10% or more or less get everything back, who just get what I've heard certain physical therapists call a stinger, which means a very, very superficial spinal cord injury where you're paralyzed for all of about a week, if that. But that was not the case. It became apparent to me, especially after 6 weeks in the hospital, that it was not going in that direction, and that this was more than likely something that I was going to have to deal with my whole life. That realization was something I didn't want to think about really at all. I spent a lot of time sleeping. I spent a lot of time, sleeping largely to dream and to escape into a different world where this wasn't my reality. Probably should have drank more in hindsight. But I didn't. I was kind of a mess, so drinking wouldn't have been necessarily a good thing. So anyway, I didn't really know anything regarding what you're supposed to do and what you're not supposed to do whenever you have this type of injury. And one of the things that you are not supposed to do is bear extensive weight, especially on any sort of bony areas of the body. This would include your ischial, which is basically kind of like your sitting bone. And I didn't know that. The physical therapists at the hospital weren't necessarily good at communicating that to me, and didn't really tell me that like there were limits to how long I could stay up in the wheelchair on a daily basis. And so I kind of wanted, after the whole, seeking only sleep phase passed by, I just wanted to distract myself by having company. And so I was always trying to be up and about. And so I'd be up and about probably about 8 to 12 hours a day in that wheelchair, just kind of scooting down the hallway, going to the hospital cafe, meeting friends, chit-chatting and all that, all while in a weird hospital gown. So done like a true Scotsman, practically. But in any case, you can't do that, because what happens when you have this injury is you no longer have sensation of a lot of areas that we subconsciously apply weight to and take weight off on a daily basis. So you may be sitting on a wooden chair right now as you're watching this video and think, well, I'll sit in a wooden chair for 3 hours a day and, I never had a bed sore. Well, that's largely to do with the fact that you can feel your butt and are constantly shifting your weight to different parts of your butt. This was not a luxury I had, and when such a inevitable bed sore did develop, the nurses who were responsible for my care decided, of course, to bandage it up, but they did two things that constitute pretty much gross malpractice. One, they didn't contact wound management, and two, they didn't tell any of the doctors. Basically, they knew that they had made a mistake and wanted to cover their asses by trying to hide mine. So 6 to 8 weeks or thereabout go by. I think it was somewhere at the end of February or beginning of March 2018. And they shipped me off to the rehab facility Weißer Hof, which is in Klosterneuburg, just outside of Vienna. And you get evaluated by the doctors on whatever floor you're on when you're admitted into this rehab facility hospital. And so they're doing their routine examination, and lo and behold, there is a necrotic ulcer that is about probably 3 to 5 inches deep where my ischial bone is, which means it was infected to the extent where tissue wasn't able to regenerate. It was just pus and infection and gross other stuff that very likely could have made its way into the bone and caused further problems. I wasn't aware of this when they sent me, because once again, I can't feel my butt. And I didn't yet grasp the severity of the situation, but they did pretty much immediately put me on bed rest. That bed rest would end up lasting for about 6 months on and off. Initially, they tried to use liberal wound management, in that they tried to use different types of common forms of wound management, including vax. I had problems with that because appears that I'm allergic to every adhesive on this planet. And so the bandage would never stay on. There would never be a tight seal. And so those never worked for me. They would constantly debride the area, constantly remove, such and such tissue, fibrous tissue, so that new tissue could form. And while the wound was getting smaller, it just wasn't closing. And so inevitably, they end up having to send me to a plastic surgeon to do a flap surgery, basically, on my butt in order to get this thing closed. And so they send me there, and I get the surgery, but they finally, and I actually had a nice, pretty nice room in that hospital. I liked it. They send me back to the rehab facility, and I wake up on my birthday, June 24th, in my bed, and it's wet. I felt it. I must have felt it with my hand or something, and that's why I knew it was wet. And I quickly turn on the light and basically see that a good half section of the bed, 2 feet by 2 feet, is just drenched in blood. At which point, I of course freak the fuck out. I'm just beside myself, kind of terrified, thinking I'm bleeding to death or something. And so I quickly push the nurse call button. They calm me down, make sure that the bleeding isn't still occurring, try and get it to clot somehow. I'm not exactly sure what they did, but as it went, they ended up having to send me back because of this, hematoma. So I go back to the plastic surgeon. He's off in Majorca doing some chick's boobs, probably. So the lesser surgeon ends up basically reopening it in order to, fix this whole hematoma situation. And afterwards, I end up with a nice, real ugly scar on my butt. Well, it's not a scar at this point. It's just stitched up scar tissue, gash. They send me back to Weißer Hof, the rehab hospital, in August. And in August, I'm finally able to start sitting up for short periods every day. And first they start at 15 minutes, then 30 minutes, then the next day maybe 45 minutes or an hour. And eventually I work my way up to being up several hours a day, mind you, on a padded cushion where I had been pressure mapped and it had been shown that I wasn't bearing too much weight on those dangerous areas. So yeah, injury January 5th, 2018, essentially the start of my recovery and physical therapy, August. So this is really not your typical situation, but this type of thing does happen. I spent about 3 months there, and I initially had the plan of staying in Austria. I had found some work working as an English teacher. I was going to probably just try and continue looking for work there. I had worked with a social worker downstairs who was helping me find an apartment. I thought I had found an apartment that I really liked that was handicapped accessible, but then that one was pulled from the market, which, I don't know. I don't believe in the whole everything happens for a reason. I'm not a Christian, and I think there's far too much suffering in the world to make such a blank statement like that. But at the same time, I think that it was a good thing in hindsight because it made me realize that as much as I didn't want to admit it to myself, I kind of needed the help of my family. So my mom, who had flown over literally the day I woke up and told them that what had happened the night before, who had been there for 11 months from January till November. And we finally came to the understanding that she was going to accompany me back to the United States, and that I was going to live with them, which I still do 4 years later. What can I say? Austin, Texas is a ridiculously expensive place. And I don't feel like paying rent, because to me it's like throwing money down a toilet. But away from that tangent, I have had health problems since. My friend Adele, who is also in a wheelchair, sarcastically refers to spinal cord injuries as the gift that keeps on giving. So since then, I've had compromised immune system, I've had pneumonia, I've had cellulitis, I've had various infections. I've, of course, had so many UTIs because I cath. And, yeah, that's about it. That basically does it for my story. I hope that wasn't too long-winded and boring. I wanted to get it out there and tell it in this way, because I felt like I needed to do it. It would probably come across as the most honest way of doing it. And then also, to some extent, it helps to talk through it, even though with disabled people, I mean, a lot of the times we don't. I mean, unless you meet somebody who's just strictly like seeking self-pity, which I would say 99% of us are not. They don't want to talk about their accident, and that's one thing. I'll just give you a little hot tip. If you do see somebody in a wheelchair, don't ask what happened. That's curiosity is fine, but that type of question is fairly tactless and crappy, and typically people don't like recounting what, for most, is the most traumatic moment in their life, especially when meeting strangers. So, anyway, I hope that you got something from that. Should you have any questions, feel free to write them down in the comments. I will do my best to answer them. And yeah, in the meantime, shoot me any questions you might have either in the comments or to my email address, and I will address them in the comments or make a video about those topics that are of interest to you. Have a nice day. Bye.